Good morning, history classes. Today is Tuesday, April 28th, and we're talking this week about the American Indian movement and the fight for Native American rights, civil rights, and whatnot. Hope you all watched the Russell Means 1989 testimony before the Senate yesterday. Pretty gripping testimony. Means was angry, understandably so. He had been at the siege at Wounded Knee in 1973, had been a pretty integral part of that. And so we're going to go back and look at the kind of overall history of the AIM, or AIM, or American Indian Movement. As with the Civil Rights Movement, the young took the lead in demanding change for American Indians. In 1961, the National Indian Youth Council, or NIYC, formed with the goal of preserving native fishing rights in the Northwest. Over time, the group expanded its aims to include broad civil rights for Native Americans. In 1968, the Chippewa activists Dennis Banks and George Mitchell founded the American Indian Movement, or AIM. At first, AIM focused on helping Indians living in urban ghettos. Before long, however, AIM was addressing all civil rights issues, particularly the securing of land, legal rights, and self-government for Native Americans. As Indians' dissatisfaction with the government grew, their activism became more militant. In late 1969, a group of American Indians occupied the island of Alcatraz, the site of a federal prison in San Francisco Bay that had closed in 1963. Members of the Sioux tribe asserted that the island belonged to them under a treaty provision granting them unused federal land. So we know that the history of the United States has been one of broken treaties made with American Indian tribes and nations. There was a provision in one of these treaties that said any unused federal land had to revert to control by Native American tribes. This, of course, like pretty much every other provision of every other treaty made with Native Americans, had been ignored, but these folks from the Sioux Nation said, hey, Alcatraz is not being used. It's no longer a prison. So we're going to go take over Alcatraz. Okay. About 100 American Indians representing 50 tribes joined the occupation. In spite of efforts by the Coast Guard and other federal authorities to evict them, the Indians maintained control of the island until mid-1971. The 1970s saw another series of confrontations, led by Dennis Banks and Russell Means. AIM orchestrated a long march from San Francisco to Washington, D.C. in 1972. Upon arriving in the capital, they took control of the Bureau of Indian Affairs building. And bear in mind, this was kind of something that was going on a lot in the 60s and 70s, this whole occupation, like with white college kids. They'd kind of started the whole occupation of college presidents' offices and things like that in opposition to Vietnam. So these Native Americans, led by Banks and Means, are going to walk across the entire continent, west to east, and then take over the Bureau of Indian Affairs building. They temporarily renamed it the Native American Embassy, suggesting Native Americans are treated as foreigners. Okay, then we get into Wounded Knee. We talked about the original massacre at Wounded Knee in 1890 back last semester. So here's where we're going to kind of come full circle on that. In 1970, D. Brown published Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, about the 1890 massacre of Sioux at Wounded Knee, South Dakota. Brown noted that in all the history of the American West, and this is a quote, only occasionally was the voice of an Indian heard, and then more often than not it was recorded by the pen of a white man. The Indian was the dark menace of the myths, and even if he had known how to write in English, where would he have found a printer or a publisher? The best-selling book raised public consciousness about the historic mistreatment of Native Americans. Building on this momentum, AIM planned a dramatic confrontation at Wounded Knee. In late February of 1973, AIM took over the village and refused to leave until the government agreed to investigate the condition of reservation Indians. Federal authorities put Wounded Knee under siege, and 2 AIM members died in the resulting gunfire. The standoff ended in May when the government pledged to re-examine Native treaty rights. Native American activism spurred the passage of several laws in the 1970s. The Indian Self-Determination Act of 1975, for instance, fulfilled one of the main demands of the American Indian movement by granting tribes greater control over resources and education on reservations. Native Americans also continued to win legal battles to regain land, mineral, and water rights. Yet the protests staged by AIM and other militant groups also provoked a political backlash, with some contending that the federal government gave special treatments to Native Americans. Okay, and this is something we see throughout American history, is that when a group has been systematically treated poorly and denied their rights, then as soon as they begin to fight back to attain their basic civil rights, then someone accuses them of wanting special rights. Okay, that's just throughout American history. While politicians debated how the government should treat Native Americans, the Indians themselves continued to suffer disproportionately from high rates of unemployment and other social ills. And this is true to this day. Saw a couple of years ago some tribes up in the north, I want to say it was in the Dakotas, protesting a pipeline that was going through their land. And in Canada, even this spring and winter, that's been happening as well, where land rights have been violated in order to build these oil pipelines through Native American land. And that's not turned out well generally for the people protesting these pipelines. So it's an ongoing thing. Later, I think tomorrow or Thursday, I'm going to be reading some from Wilma Mankiller's autobiography. Wilma Mankiller was the, what was she, the primary chief?
Oh yeah, she's the chief of the Cherokee Nation.
Yeah, of the Cherokee Nation back up until 1995, I believe. And she had been involved in the occupation of Alcatraz as well. So we're going to be reading some from her autobiography about her reminiscences from that. Anyway, I hope you all are doing well, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.